Hi everybody, Jacob from Chess Artistry here. Today we're going to take a look at one of the earliest immortal chess games in history, not the earliest, but the only one to earn the nickname the Immortal Game, and the first to earn the name Immortal at all. Earlier Immortals were only called Immortals after this one, and a very beautiful and instructive one. It was played at the 1851 London Chess Tournament, which was the first international chess tournament in history between Adolf Anderssen and Lionel Kieseritzky, although, oddly enough, it was not actually an official game played in the 1851 London Chess Tournament, but was rather an informal game, a casual game, played between the rounds. So it's really weird. One of the most famous chess tournaments in history produced one of the most famous chess games in history, but it technically isn't actually a game from the tournament itself, but from a casual game played between rounds. Let's get to know our two players real quick. There's a lot to say about Adolf Anderssen, but suffice to say here that he was born in 1818 in Breslau, Poland, but was in fact a German, and became one of the world's leading chess players in the middle of the 19th century. He was considered the best chess player in the world for nearly 20 years, and was one of the strongest in the world for much longer than that. He died in 1879 at the age of 60, and was an unofficial world championship contender, though he lost his matches to unofficial world champion Paul Morphy, who defeated him in their match in 1858 before abruptly retiring from chess, at which point Anderssen resumed his status as the presumed best player in the world, until he lost his match in 1866 with Wilhelm Steinitz, who of course went on to become the first official world chess champion later during the championship era. Anderssen is known especially for his wild, sacrificing, attacking, romantic style, and the beautiful games he produced with it. He's known for a few variations in a few well-known openings, but has no real opening named after him, and for the most part liked to play sacrificial openings like the King's Gambit and the Evans Gambit in the Italian. He was also, like most chess players of his day, not a professional chess player, but was a mathematics professor for a living, while chess was just a hobby, which is pretty impressive, I think, to be the best in the world at a professional sport, or what is now a professional sport, as a hobbyist. His opponent in this game is Lionel Kieseritzky, who, like Anderssen, was a German born in a country that today is not in Germany. Kieseritzky was a German born in what is now Estonia. He was born in 1806, so was about 12 years older than Anderssen, and was never one of the best players in the world, but was one of the best players in France, where he went to live in his 30s and lived for the rest of his life. He was a member of the famous Café de la Régence chess club in Paris and an editor of the magazine there. Also, like Anderssen, he was a mathematics professor, though unlike Anderssen, he became a relatively uncommon compared to today, example of a professional chess player giving chess lessons or playing games for 5 francs an hour at the Café de la Régence. He died quite young by today's standards at the age of 47 in 1853, just 2 years after playing this game, and 2 years before this game was first called the Immortal Game. Like Anderssen, there are a couple of variations in a few openings that are named after him in the Encyclopedia of Chess Openings, but he's much better remembered, unfortunately for him, for having lost this game to Anderssen between rounds at the 1851 London Chess Tournament. Okay, so let's see what makes this game so special. Anderssen has the white pieces, and Kieseritzky has the black pieces. The game starts out with e4, e5, f4. So the King's Gambit. Not very popular today with grandmasters, and probably objectively very dubious, but it's 1851, so everyone's come to party, and that means give away all your pieces and pawns, develop quickly, and play for checkmate. So of course Anderssen is playing the King's Gambit. He played this almost more than any other opening. And it's 1851, so of course Kieseritzky accepts the Gambit, because he's an honorable fellow, and all joking aside, accepting the King's Gambit is actually by far the most popular response as black, and probably the most critical try for an advantage. Now if Anderssen had played knight f3 here, the game could have continued with knight f3, g5, h4, and g4, which is a line named after Kieseritzky. It's the Kieseritzky attack in the King's Gambit, and believe it or not, it's the most common way the King's Gambit has been played historically. And the idea for white is to develop quickly with knight to f3, prevent this annoying queen to h4 check move, and for black the idea is to simply crush white on the king side as soon as possible, a common motif in the King's Gambit, not surprising in an opening where white moves his f-pawn on move 2. But here Anderssen didn't play knight f3, he allowed queen h4 with check, and instead played bishop to c4, which is known as the bishop's gambit. It's the second most popular response to the King's Gambit accepted, and if you ask Stockfish at depth 33, it will actually recommend it over knight f3 by a tiny slim little margin. The idea is to develop the bishop immediately, let black play queen h4 check if he wants, and after he does, white will be able to play knight f3 with a tempo on the queen at some point, so trading castling rights in exchange for a tempo. And indeed, that's what happens. Kieseritzky plays queen h4 check, Anderssen scoots his king over to f1, the only sane move, and he'll play knight f3 with tempo as soon as possible. Now black has several playable options here, the most popular being to play d6, preparing to develop the light square bishop and getting it into the attack on the king side. But Kieseritzky plays quite a rare move, a very rare move actually, one that the computer doesn't like and thinks throws away the advantage for black and gives it back to white, which is b5, a very strange pawn sacrifice. It's hard for me to figure out what the idea is. The only thing I can think of is to play c6 with a tempo on the bishop, and then d5 with support, and then maybe at some point swing the bishop out to a6 with some nice pressure on the king side, similar to the Evans Gambit with white in the Italian, which would be b4, not b5, of course, with similar center building and piece developing ideas. But with black behind in development, his king in the center, and his e-pawn no longer in the center but on f4, I don't think this sacrifice should work, and nobody really strong has played this recently with black at all, and it doesn't score well, and it just looks bad. But all of that being said, what's really funny is that at some point during this tournament, Kieseritzky actually tried this exact same line against Anderssen again and won with black. Kieseritzky actually played this quite a few times and had good results with it, but I don't think you'll see anyone strong playing this today. I think the highest rated attempt in chess history of this weird b5 move was in 1993, when Kasparov tried it against Nigel Short in a rapid game and lost. In any case, it's 1851, so Anderssen accepts. Bishop takes b5. Kieseritzky plays knight f4, attacking the e-pawn, which has nothing to do with the pawn sacrifice on b5, so again, don't ask me why he did that. Anderssen plays knight f3, getting that tempo on the queen, responding to a threat with an even greater threat, and Kieseritzky drops the queen back to h6. Now in the game that Kieseritzky won against Anderssen during the same tournament, Anderssen played knight c3 here and lost. But in this game, Anderssen plays d3 instead, simply defending the e-pawn and opening up the dark square bishop's eyes to the f-pawn and the queen behind it. Stockfish doesn't like this move and actually wants to play d4 and allow black to capture on e4 if he wants, opening the e-file, which shouldn't lose for black but should be very uncomfortable after the following variation in the event that black captures that e-pawn, which he probably shouldn't. Knight takes e4, queen e2, bishop to b7, d5. The pawn is not quite poisonous, but definitely isn't very appetizing, because if bishop takes d5, knight c3, queen e6, knight takes bishop, queen takes knight, and bishop takes f4. This is just one possible variation if black accepts all these central pawns and opens up the center, but white is getting a lot of rapid development with tempo, and black's king and pieces are not looking very secure, so a pretty uncomfortable variation for black. But Anderssen doesn't go for any of this, he just plays d3. Kieseritzky plays knight h5, overprotecting the f4 pawn, so his queen can go somewhere else and unpin his f-pawn. And Anderssen plays knight f5, eyeing up that very nice f5 square with a tempo on the queen, also pressuring the g7 and e7 squares and getting within checking distance of the king. Stockfish doesn't like this move, in part because after g6 the knight can't go to f5 and is looking pretty silly on the side of the board. Also, it could be kicked with g6 later. Both knights are looking pretty silly actually, but it's 1851, so that's normal. But Kieseritzky responds not with g6, but with queen to g5, allowing knight f5, but now knight f5 won't come with any tempo, and he adds pressure to the g-file. Kieseritzky didn't play g6, so Anderssen goes ahead and plants the knight on that juicy f5 square. He plays knight f5, or knife f5, as Ben Feingold would say. And now, rather than playing g6, kicking the knight off that juicy f5 square, which is the best move, Kieseritzky instead plays c6, with a tempo on the bishop, which was made possible by the earlier pawn sacrifice on b5. But Anderssen doesn't move that bishop. It's been a whole 7 moves since he last left something hanging when he played the king's gambit on move 2, so he leaves that bishop hanging, time to leave something hanging, and plays g4, attacking the knight, and taking advantage of the fact that Kieseritzky can't capture en passant because the f-pawn is pinned by the bishop on c1. If it weren't for that pin, g4 would be a terrible move, opening up the king side and all. But here it's actually okay. The computer doesn't like it, but it's 1851, so who cares what the computer thinks? So Kieseritzky's knight is attacked, so he drops it back to f6. And again, Anderssen leaves the bishop hanging and plays rook to g1, protecting that g4 pawn and also lining up with the queen. And now you'll notice that the black queen is sort of running short on squares. She's not quite trapped exactly, but her mobility is about to be severely limited after a move like h4. And Kieseritzky either doesn't recognize this or doesn't care, and he takes that bishop, which is possibly the losing move of the game, or one of them, because now Anderssen plays h4, attacking the queen. The queen has nowhere safe to go but g6. Anderssen pushes h5, attacking the queen again and freeing up the g5 square again for the queen, so she returns to g5. And now, after Anderssen plays queen to f3, white is threatening to capture on f4 with the bishop, at which point black's queen will have no more safe squares and will have to give herself up for the bishop. She will be trapped. Now things are pretty bad for black here, probably losing actually with correct play from white, but I'm wondering if you can find the best defense for black and what you would play here as black, understanding that white is threatening bishop takes f4. It's a very tactical, dynamic defense. If you'd like to pause your video and figure it out, you can do so here. Okay, so the best move for black in this position, which Kieseritzky did not find, is actually bishop to b7, a pretty tricky move, and if you pause the video and found it, then you probably understand the reason why. For everybody else, the idea is very tactical, and it has to do with 2 observations about the position, or 2 tactical facts about the position. One is a potential knight fork on h2, and the second is the fact that white's e-pawn is now pinned to the undefended queen. So now if, for example, bishop takes f4, black can actually get away with knight takes g4, because if bishop takes queen, then there's a knight fork on h2, and after a few logical moves, after the smoke has cleared, black is down a pawn and way behind a development, but this might actually be holdable, and would have been better than what happened in the game. And in case you're wondering what happens if white recognizes this little knight fork trick and wants to win the knight instead with the rook and so plays rook takes knight, well then he's going to be very disappointed because the queen can simply capture the knight on f5 because the e-pawn is pinned. So if pawn takes queen and bishop takes queen, all that has occurred since white's bishop was captured on b5 is a pawn trade, a knight trade, and a queen trade. So white would just be down that bishop and losing this game if he just tries to take that knight with the rook. What white should do in response to bishop to b7 probably is just capture the knight with the queen, and after the queens are traded, Again, white is definitely better, but not as much better as happened in the game. So this is what you would have to know as black, or to figure out over the board, in order to not lose in an Immortal game against Adolf Anderssen in 1851. But Kieseritzky didn't figure this out, and instead simply played knight to g8, a very sad move, setting up for the next game, just so he has somewhere to retreat his queen after bishop takes f4. So Anderssen takes on f4, and after the queen retreats, plays knight to c3. And now if you look at the position, all of white's pieces except the rook on a1 are participating. They're all developed, whereas all of black's pieces are on the back row except for his queen, the one piece that he really doesn't want to be developed right now because all she's doing is getting attacked and giving away free tempos. And this is exactly how you want to play in the King's Gambit. Sacrifice material in exchange for rapid development and lots of tempi and initiative. So if you're brave enough to play the King's Gambit, this is a great game to know. It's true that white is down a piece, but just look at black's pieces. They're all terrible. Where is black's extra material here exactly? It's on the back row, doing nothing. Stockfish calls this position plus 3.2, saying that white is effectively up a piece here. That's how bad it is for black right now. Okay, but it's black to move, and how do you win this as white? Kieseritzky plays bishop to c5, developing a piece, finally, and attacking the rook. And it's been a whole 6 moves now since Anderssen left something hanging, so of course he doesn't save the rook. He instead plays knight to d5, attacking the queen, again responding to a threat with an even greater threat. And what is black supposed to do here? The queen is under attack. She doesn't have many good options. Going back to her home square on d8 is as terrible as it looks, really setting up for the next game. This is just terrible. Queen to e6 allows a knight fork on g7. There are no really good moves here, so Kieseritzky captures a pawn, takes on b2. It's 1851, so if he's going to lose, he's at least going to do it up material. And now, fortunately for Kieseritzky, Anderssen played a terrible move that should lose the game for him if black plays correctly. But fortunately for Anderssen, Kieseritzky didn't find the refutation. Pause your video here and see if you can find the brilliant looking and ultimately winning but technically losing move that Anderssen played. Okay, the move that Anderssen played here looks very cute. Bishop to d6. Black has 2 rooks that he could take. Now, only one move wins for black in this position, and we'll come back to this position later and see which one that is. The move that Kieseritzky played in the game, and which loses, is bishop takes rook. And here Anderssen should just save his other rook and play something like rook e8, but he again hangs the other rook, and instead pushes e5, which, believe it or not, objectively still probably wins for white. And the idea is that it breaks the queen's connection to the g7 square, and we'll see why that's important very shortly. So Kieseritzky accepted the other rook, of course, with check, his honor being on the line here, and takes it with check. So Anderssen scoots his king up to e2. Now Kieseritzky played the real losing move of the game, knight to a6. So now both of Kieseritzky's knights have visited the edge of the board at some point in this game. And okay, it looks ridiculous, but he's probably worried about a knight fork on c7, losing his rook. But he's already up 2 rooks and a bishop, so this is really not what he should be thinking about right now. He should be thinking about how to not get mated, but he's greedy and tries to keep all the extra material, I think. Maybe he saw some other checkmate, but I think it might have been about the material. And this move, believe it or not, hangs checkmate in 3 moves, which Anderssen finds and plays. Feel free to pause the video here if you like and find the checkmate in 3 that Anderssen played to win the game. Okay, so for those of you who paused, welcome back, and to the rest of you, thank you for staying. The move that Anderssen played, and that results in checkmate in just 3 more moves, is knight takes g7 check. The king has only one square, d8. And now, if you found that queen takes f7 leads to checkmate, as there's no reasonable way to stop queen e8 checkmate, black would have to give up the queen and he'd still be getting checkmated in a few moves, then good for you, you found checkmate, but shame on you because I said it's checkmate in 3 moves and queen takes f7 allows black to delay checkmate for a few more moves. Did you find the checkmate in 2 moves from this point, from this position? And if you didn't, can you now? The checkmate in 2 from here that Anderssen found and played, that I think makes this the Immortal Game, not really the first Immortal Game and certainly not the only one, but one of the earliest Immortals and the only one called the Immortal Game, starts with queen to f6 check. Sort of a hard move to find and one of those stopping one move short kind of moves that computers find easily, but I think humans tend not to even consider calculating. Queen f6 check, forcing black to capture the queen. There is no other legal move. And after Kieseritzky took the queen, Anderssen played bishop to e8 checkmate. Again, don't forget about these monster knights. So a very beautiful finish to a somewhat dubious middle game. Now, after this game, which again Kieseritzky and Anderssen played as a casual game in between the official games of the tournament in London in 1851, Kieseritzky was so impressed with this that he ran to the nearest telegraph machine and telegraphed the moves back to the Café de la Régence in Paris, where Kieseritzky was an editor of the club's magazine, which published it the following month. And that is how, oddly enough, this casual game played in between official rounds of the extremely strong and famous 1851 London chess tournament became more famous than any of the other games played during the actual official tournament. And for those of you wondering where it got the nickname, the Immortal Game, it got that name from, believe it or not, the Austrian player Ernst Falkbeer, who most of you, if you recognize the name Falkbeer, probably know from the Falkbeer counter gambit in the King's Gambit. Falkbeer gave the nickname 4 years after this game was played in 1855, and in so doing, if I'm not mistaken, coined the term Immortal Game, which has since been applied to maybe 60 or 70 other games since then, and even some games that were played before this. All of those other games are called Immortals because they will always be watched, studied, and enjoyed by people learning about chess or just enjoying it. But they all have other nicknames, and this is the only one known as the Immortal Game. Now, not to rain on Falkbeer's parade, but in fact, the very cute-looking bishop to d6 move back here on move 17 basically throws away the game for white, objectively, in a position where white would be winning otherwise. And what's funny is that in his commentary on this game in the Café de la Régence magazine the following month, Kieseritzky called this bishop to d6 move, this blunder, the coup de grace which proves all black's efforts futile. So a month later, he still had not found the refutation, which I'll show you now. Now, I'm all for enjoying famous Romantic era games for what they were, which were brilliant and famous and beautiful without the assistance of computers. But long before computers, before the 20th century even, people figured out that this move was losing, that it was bad. And here the winning move for black, which Kieseritzky missed, is not bishop takes rook, as was played in the game, but rather queen takes rook on a1 with check. Which is sort of funny because in the game Kieseritzky did play queen takes a1 check only after playing bishop takes rook. So taking one rook is winning, but taking 2 rooks is losing. Also, now that after king e2 the queen is attacked, there's no time to take the rook on g1 because again you're getting checkmated, same as in the game. So here the best move for black, and the only move that wins the game, is queen to b2, threatening to take on c2 with check, and more importantly, defending the g7 square. So now knight takes g7 doesn't work anymore because the queen can simply recapture and join the defense. And white just doesn't have enough material left to win this game, scary as it looks for black. And if white tries, as happened in the game, to break the queen's connection to g7 with the move e5, well, there's just not enough time for this, because after queen to c2 check and the king moves, black can either check the king around some more and win the a-pawn and then play king to d8, or just play king to d8 immediately. And the problem is that now knight takes g7 is possible. The queen isn't defending g7 anymore, but it doesn't come with check. So black can simply capture the bishop on d6, and with the knight on g7, there is no knight checkmate. And after the e-pawn recaptures, we get a position that, again, looks very scary for black, but in fact white has just lost too much material here, and not only can't really continue the attack with correct play from black, which shouldn't be too difficult if all black tries to do is not get checkmated, black should go on to win this game fairly easily. Kieseritzky's mistake was taking bishop takes rook first, allowing Anderssen to play this sneaky f5 move, breaking the connection between the queen and the g7 square, allowing tactics with knight takes g7 and then also taking the rook on a1. And the last thing I'll say about this position is that if you ask an engine will say that if bishop takes rook and queen takes rook, as was played in the game with the e5 move inserted in this position here, black has only one move that doesn't result in checkmate by force, which is the bizarre looking bishop to a6. I can't even ask you to find this move to pause your video. It's so weird looking. Not only allowing this knight to c6 move, winning the rook in the corner, but also giving the knight the option to capture the bishop if the knight on b8 ever moves as well. Also moving the bishop to a square where, unlike b7, it's blocked by its own pawn. Every other move is a forced checkmate if you ask an engine, and don't ask me to explain this. And this move alone is plus 3.5 for white according to Stockfish on depth 33. Still totally winning for white, but somehow more of a challenge. And I think an interesting exercise for people looking to get better at calculation and at both attacking and defending in weird, tough, unbalanced positions like this is to put this position on the board with a friend. Not a computer. The moves are too easy to find even for an engine on toned down difficulty levels, and it's not as interesting. Put this position on a board with a human being and see if you can win with white. See if you can find all the right forcing moves and checkmating ideas to win down a bishop and two rooks. Or if with the black pieces you can defend, and get into some endgame up a boatload of material and win with black. I think this is a really interesting position to improve your chess with a partner and to see if you can play like Anderssen with white or better than Kieseritzky did with black. In any case, this was a very beautiful and instructive game, a model way to play the King's Gambit accepted, getting tempo after tempo, getting rapid development in exchange for some material, threatening checkmate as often and as creatively as possible. Sadly not perfect if you ask an engine, but what are you going to do? It's 1851, Anderssen had no engine, and in my opinion, more importantly, found the fastest way to checkmate here in this position on move 22. I think an important takeaway from this is to calculate accurately. Look at all checks and captures. Look at these stop short kind of moves. This stop short kind of move is one of those moves like long range moves, lateral moves, and backwards moves that are really hard to spot and that humans don't usually even consider. Though in this case, I think a human really should calculate this move because it comes with check. Always calculate checks and captures, especially when your opponent has only one legal move. And it should be pretty easy to calculate, and in this case it paid off. Not with a checkmate exactly, because black was getting checkmated even with queen takes d7, but it paid off with a much more beautiful checkmate than usual, and also the shortest, most efficient. I hope you enjoyed this game as much as I did. If you did, then please consider clicking the like button below the video, subscribe to this channel to see more videos like this, and consider supporting the channel via PayPal or Patreon from the links in the description if you are so inclined, and I'll see you in the next one.